Hi. A couple of months ago, you may remember I was doing a series of sort of podcasts around new monasticism. And I was asked by a few people if I would consider doing them as video blogs, because it seems that the video blog format is a bit more, user friendly. So what I'm going to do over the next couple of weeks is just record through the video the podcast that I did and replace that on the Society of St. Columba's website. So I'll start with the first new monasticism blog that I did, which really was my attempt at beginning to capture some of the journey, the theological and the experiential journey that some of us within the Society of St. Columba have been on. So I'll kick off with the first one called New Monasticism. And I start with a quote from John Skinner, who was the founder of the Northumbria community way back in the 80s. Crikey, that seems a long time ago. But anyway, he said the following: new monasticism is a response to an event, and that event is the death of God. It is not a lifestyle choice. And I know when I heard John say that, I remember thinking to myself, what an astute insight that was, particularly into the spiritual dissonance that is new monasticism. And for me, it observed two realities that I must acknowledge before I can begin to look at what I consider to be the exciting opportunity that new monasticism presents us with. Firstly, we have to be very careful with the word new. You know, if I learned anything from my early years as a Christian growing up in the British charismatic non-denominational churches, the overuse of the word new leads to a sort of an ecclesial hubris, stagnation of vision, and ultimately a spiritual decline. It appears that the only people that profit from the choice of the words new and church are the authors and publishers of the endless stream of books on new models of church that guarantee growth. I mean, it seems now, I say this as an aside, it seems now that with the sort of the fracture that is going on within Western society, the church seems to be consolidating into a narrative of mega church, big church is good, which I'm not personally that convinced of. Volume over value is not really a good recipe in the kingdom of heaven, in my opinion. So to speak of new in the context of monasticism is only to speak of its kind of contemporary reality. It's only new because it's today, now, rather than new as an original thought or an idea. Very simply, the sanguine writer of Ecclesiastes notes this: there is nothing new under the sun. So for the adherents of new monasticism, we start as we mean to go on, recognizing that we are seeking to follow God according to an ancient tradition, a tradition that is rooted in wisdom and the timeless pursuit of unity with God. I most certainly, and all those exponents out there of new monasticism, none of us have come up with a new idea. This is a very old idea. Secondly, we got to look at the notion of the death of God. The death of God conjures the apparent irreconcilable paradox of the Christian faith. Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. That is the confession of the church. And we cannot escape the facts of our faith, that as Christians, we place our faith in a man who was executed by the world on account of his confession, I am the living God. Every generation since the crucifixion has had to struggle with this apparent paradox. Every generation continues to crucify Jesus in the name of their own interpretation of who God is. And every generation is challenged afresh to allow their construct of God to be put to death in order to be rediscovered and grow into the truth of what it means to be a disciple of the resurrected Jesus. To follow Christ is to be arrested by an event, the death of God, and to be called to walk in the light of that bloody execution. This walk is the way of the cross, and it requires a total and complete surrender to the will of the Spirit of holiness. The God that I believe in must die daily in my life in order for the living God to be resurrected again and again and again in my humanity. Humanity is the Imago Dei, the image of God. It is not the other way round. We do not create God in our own image, as so many fundamentalists would have us do. No, we are created in the image of the living God, the person of Jesus. This, I believe, strikes at the very heart of what new monasticism is all about. And it's certainly what I am personally discovering. Our lives surrendered and encountered by the unadulterated authenticity of the living God. The quest, therefore, is to enter into the new humanity offered in Christ. And I think it is important to establish these 2 points at the beginning of these video blogs. And to quote the wisdom of a good friend of ours, Larry Littlebird, we are walking backwards into the future. The ancient meeting the contemporary. Moving forward, but facing the ancient traditions of our past to inform our tomorrow. So over the next 3 video blogs entitled New Monasticism, I want to look at 3 characteristics that I have personally discovered signify an authentic Celtic New Monasticism. And they are, in summary, being indigenous, discipleship in the land, the imitation of Christ, we just keep walking, and that sense of place, the establishment of liminal community. Of course, it's not an exclusive list. I know there are other exponents of new monastic practice, who will have their own unique insights into what constitutes authentic new monasticism. The above are purely my own reflections and have been formed over the last 10 years and have crystallized really in the last 12 to 18 months as I've worked with the Society of St. Columba, particularly in and around the sheep fields of West Sussex. So I want to start with being indigenous, discipleship in the land. And Lilla Watson, who was an Australian indigenous activist, said the following: "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us walk together." And I'm no anthropologist, but in my capacity as an advocate for justice and righteousness in jewellery, and as a practitioner of new monasticism, I have had the privilege of working alongside indigenous peoples from the Ruby Mountains of Greenland, the high deserts of Peru, the jungles of Colombia, the goldfields of the Eastern Congo, which is a piece of work I'm currently involved with. And all these amazing communities have differences of culture, tastes, local practices, but equally display a number of things in common. 1, they converse with God as creator and live as children of God in the land. They have all got a clear sense of the land from where their people have come from. In fact, the land and the people are one. The injustices done to their people by historical colonial powers and now neo-colonial corporate powers are still alive and crying out for justice, deliverance, and reparation. And this is why, many of them cannot leave the land of their ancestors. The great evils of forced relocation and genocide, and the raping and the pillaging and the stealing and the robbing of the land demand a living, present witness. And fourthly, they have all been consciously oppressed and disinherited by political military empires in the name of economic progress, greed, and civilization, the inference being indigenous people are not civilized. I would include the imperialized manifestations of organized missionary activity in this, which I appreciate is a strong statement for a lot of the missionary activity that is currently going on around the world. But culturally and theologically, and I think most importantly, in terms of the imitation of Christ, I do question what I have personally observed as missionary activity, particularly on the continent of Africa. But that perhaps is a blog for another day. So it is important that we recognize that where we stand is significant. In many respects, it defines how people see us and how they understand us. This standing in the land is not only a principled stand of conscience or a theological identity, but also where we physically locate ourselves as an act of public communication. It's the non-verbal transaction that sets the example of leadership and subsequent discipleship. After all, Jesus did say the following thing when he gave the Great Commission. In the manner in which my Father has sent me, I am sending you. Therefore, go disciple the nations. And that is how the Aramaic Bible, translated into English, reads Matthew 28, 18 and 19. It is in fact the manner in which the Father sent Jesus as one of the people and to a land which is most significant. He sent Jesus to live among them as one of them. He was the servant, the Son of Man, who had nowhere to lay his head. He was poor, rejected, betrayed, despised, abandoned, as well as being a folk healer, a hero, a popular speaker, and a moral teacher. In every way, Jesus was the exemplar of the meek who will inherit the earth. This is the manner in which God chose to walk among us, and the manner and the expectation of how the Father expects us to walk, as one of the people, alongside the people, to stand with the people, not as the custodians of some elitist message about pie in the sky revival while you're waiting to die, but as someone who struggles alongside the poor, as one of them, so our future is genuinely bound up with theirs. In Britain today, we have church leaders who have forgotten the manner in which Jesus walked among the people. Imitation, as we shall see in a later blog, is the only model for Christian discipleship that Jesus leaves us with. Congregations are often made in the image of their leaders, and the leadership of the church in Britain struggles with authenticity, primarily because it does not believe that the way Jesus did things actually works. Its leaders, whose dwindling congregations believe they should emulate, do not stand with the people. They do not wash cars in public car parks, farm the land with impoverished farmers, stand on the building sites with ex-convicts or those expelled from school. Nor do they fish the seas or clean public lavatories, because this is all they know or can do. No, for so many of the Christians, the Christian leaders, they are professional Christians who expect to be paid for their Christian service rather than workers who lead from the ground. This type of leadership, this absentee landlord leader, have abandoned the people to a world system that has no capacity to bring hope or freedom. They dress in the robes of ecclesiastical tradition or put on suits and ties to impress the wealthy and maintain tradition. Indeed, some of them even live in their suits and ties, inhabit the culture of the worldly and the powerful, and believe that in making huge sums of money, they are influencing the course of the nation for God. It's extraordinary. Others stand on populist platforms and preach a message of how Jesus will lead us into a revival, exhorting congregations to greater sacrifice and more soulish worship, whilst retiring to the VIP lounge to sip wine and share anecdotes with others who share in the benefits of the elitist evangelical system. They live in meetings where they plan social projects to help alleviate the suffering of the poorest, and talk of justice as if a national law or a policy change was the fulfillment of the call to seek righteousness. I've been a Christian now for over 30 years. I've been in and around the church for that time and longer. And I observe, and it is my observation, that this is where the overwhelming majority of leadership in the British church stands, far removed from the people who have quite understandably, and continue to do so, abandoned their congregations because they see the hypocrisy of a well-intentioned, yet maladjusted dogmatic ideology and historical institution. We just have to wake up in Britain and recognise that the current settlement is not working. So repeating the formula is not going to help reverse that system, that process, that experience. I love what Pope Francis says. Instead of being shepherds living with the smell of the sheep, this is what I am asking you. Be shepherds with the smell of sheep. What the Pope neglected, of course, to say in this call to action and identity, most likely, is that he has a limited experience of shepherding sheep close up, because, to smell of the sheep basically means that you will smell of their shit. I now do have some experience of that, as I'm a very bad amateur shepherd at the moment. We need leadership in the British church that abandons the platform, the high altar, the ecclesial comforts, and resides again in the communities of the marginalised and the forgotten landscapes of Britain. A leadership that rediscovers its rightful place in the land as humble servants and embodies the Jesus mantle of the Beatitudes in communities. Then I believe the people of the land will turn once again and trust in our most beautiful of messages. To my mind, this is what it means to be an indigenous new monastic, to be at the vanguard of the reawakening the people to the reality of God the Creator as servant amongst them, to live like the people and stand alongside them in their economic and social vulnerability. We cannot escape our economic security, our investment into monetary security as the body of Christ undermines the power of our message. You cannot serve God and money. Discipleship can only be outworked in the land where we belong. In order to know the land where we belong, all you need do is ask, in what soil do I wish to be buried, or on whose winds shall my ashes be carried? When you can answer this question, then you know where you belong. To speak of discipleship in the land is to affirm a godly covenantal heritage that is distinct from the construct of nation-state and its designation of citizens, subjects, and land as a commodity to be owned and governed over. The nation-state cannot and never will be able to embody the ideal of the kingdom of heaven. Jesus' mission was focused on the establishing of a new humanity under God the Father that transcended all national, ethnic, racial, and gender boundaries. These new expressions of humanity became known as the body of Christ. It is a kingdom established in the hearts of its adherents and expressed through service to the land and its people in partnership with the Spirit of holiness. In our contemporary context, given the advanced twilight of the Western hegemony, or put another way, as the Western neoliberal ideology eats itself and everything else to death, the question of what and in whom do we trust is becoming an increasing source of desperation and hope. If you cannot trust the political and religious institutions that have so defined the era of modernity, what can you trust? One of the most damaging and confusing manifestations in the church at the moment is the idea that there is such a thing as a Christian nation and the conflation of nationalism and God's blessing. To place one's faith in the economic ideologies, political structures, or the constitutions of a nation state is an idolatry and a denial of the message and witness of Jesus. Pilate's discourse prior to the execution of God revolved around an understanding of who is the custodian of truth, God or the empire. Jesus' own nation and religious leaders submit Jesus to the empire to be executed on the grounds of sedition, blasphemy, and claims of kingship. The American or the British political construct can no more represent the Christian faith than a dog can be a sheep, or put it in its starkest contrast, the Bible and the flag are mutually exclusive. So as new monastics, we are challenged to reassess our allegiances and our understanding of who and where we place our trust. Our point of departure and return, our home, is the breast of Jesus. The Aramaic Bible in English reads John 13:23 as follows. But there was one of his disciples who was supported in his bosom, for whom Yeshua had great affection. Our allegiance is to the Word of creation, who is the source of all life, and that's not just human life. The gospel is not anthropocentric, it is creational. And our service is to the integrity and well-being of the land and its people in the place where God has placed us. To become a people of the land, the migration from the idolatry of nationalism begins with the realization that we do not belong to the world, and to avoid the love of the world. To walk towards Christ is to walk away from the world system. How we walk will be the subject of the next video blog that I do. How we walk is we walk in the imitation of Christ. Thank you.